Welcome to Hood Politics. In this episode, I will be discussing the Grim Sleeper. The facts of the case are as follows. When it comes to infamous murderers from South Central Los Angeles, a few names come to mind, such as Lil Fee from the Rolling 60s, who was sentenced to death after murdering 4 people in August of 1984, or Ace Capone from the Van Ness Gangsta Brims, who was sentenced to death after murdering 5 people at a house party in October of 1984. But at the same time these men were wreaking havoc on the streets of South Central, there was a darker presence at work, one that wasn't killing over drugs, territory, gang pride, or revenge, but simply for the thrill. Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was born on August 30th, 1952, and spent most of his childhood in South Central Los Angeles. Lonnie's parents, Ruby and Lonnie Sr., were strict, but were also caring and did their best to raise Lonnie and his younger sister Patricia in a loving home. Ruby and Sr. moved to LA in the 1940s in order to take advantage of the booming job market. Sr. ultimately landed a job as a longshoreman. During his spare time, he worked on cars, and from time to time he would let Lonnie tag along. Lonnie quickly developed a passion for cars. Sr. took notice and began seriously teaching Lonnie about cars, and by the age of 7, Sr. was letting Lonnie drive. Over the years, Lonnie became good with his hands and began expanding his expertise from cars to appliances, but he struggled when it came to school and making friends. The other students picked on him for being short and overweight. In 1966, at the age of 14, Sr. gave Lonnie his first car. Lonnie wasted no time getting behind the wheel and could often be seen cruising through the city. During high school, Lonnie transferred to a better rated school in the city of Compton. His parents felt that the school was better equipped to help him academically, but he continued to struggle, and before long, his academic issues became behavior issues. At the age of 16, Lonnie was arrested twice for grand theft auto, and the following year he was arrested for burglary. Right before he was scheduled to graduate high school, Lonnie got into a fight, leading him to be expelled. He then picked up a job at a nearby grocery store while he figured things out. Sr. suggested that Lonnie join the army. He felt that it was a good idea because not only would it keep him out of trouble, but he would get to travel the world and get paid while doing so. In 1971, Lonnie enlisted in the army and began basic training. 6 months later, at the age of 19, Lonnie was stationed in Stuttgart, Germany. By age 21, Lonnie had taken to the army well and was working his way up the ranks. He became a corporal and the kitchen supervisor. Everyone believed that Lonnie had finally found his place in life and everything was going to work out, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. On April 17th, 1974, at around 12:30 a.m., Lonnie was in a car with 2 other army men when the group spotted a 17-year-old young woman named Ingrid walking down the street. They stopped and asked her for directions and then offered her a ride home. Ingrid accepted the ride and got into the car. A few moments later, one of the men held a knife to her throat. They then drove her to a remote location and took turns assaulting her. Lonnie even took pictures during the attack. Ingrid began faking interest in the men in hopes that it would lead them to let her go, which ultimately worked. As the group drove Ingrid to her destination, Lonnie gave her his phone number. After being dropped off, Ingrid reported the attack to police. Investigators had her call Lonnie and lure him to a nearby train station. Lonnie was arrested after arriving and was ultimately convicted of kidnapping and assault. On December 20th, 1974, Lonnie was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison, but only ended up serving less than a year. On July 24th, 1975, Lonnie was given a dishonorable discharge from the army. At the age of 23, he returned to LA and began working odd jobs to make ends meet. While getting readjusted to civilian life, he met a 21-year-old educator named Sylvia Castillo. She was a teacher and had relocated to LA from Belize. She was well known in the neighborhood and spent time taking care of the elderly. The two instantly clicked, and shortly afterwards, they were married and settled into a home on 81st Street near Western Avenue. They then decided to start a family. In 1978, they had a daughter named Crystal, and in 1981, they had a son named Christopher. That same year, Lonnie began looking for more stable work to support his family. He stumbled across an opening for a mechanic position working on police cruisers for the LAPD. Lonnie loved the job. He was able to provide for his family while making a steady income doing something that he loved. He stayed at the job for about a year, but he wanted more, so he applied to become a garbage truck operator. The job paid more, had benefits, and room for growth. Shortly afterwards, he was hired. The Franklins seemed to have it all: a loving marriage, great kids, and budding careers. Lonnie would fix his neighbors' cars and appliances for a discounted rate, and sometimes even for free. He would also loan people money when they needed it. The Franklins were known as great entertainers and would throw parties and barbecues on a regular basis, and people from all over the neighborhood would attend. It seemed like Lonnie had finally gotten himself together, but it was all a facade. Lonnie's dark side never left. He just became better at hiding it. He was living a double life, one of a loving husband, father, and member of the community, and another of a murderous psychopath. On an August night in 1985, a 29-year-old woman named Deborah Jackson was at the home of Elizabeth and Leo Anderson. Deborah had moved in with the couple and their 4 children in 1981. Elizabeth was cooking dinner when Deborah told her that she had to go repay a loan. Elizabeth urged her to wait until the next morning, but Deborah told her that payment had to be made that night. Elizabeth offered her a ride, but Deborah said she'll just catch the bus and be back by 10 p.m. Elizabeth hugged Deborah and watched her walk down the street until she was out of view. Unfortunately, Deborah never made it back home. On August 10th, 1985, a man was walking his dog in an alley near Gage Avenue when he discovered Deborah's body. She had been shot 3 times in the chest with a .25 caliber pistol, and her body was wrapped in an old carpet. No bullet casings were found at the scene. Deborah's purse was found nearby. Investigators searched her purse and found her ex-girlfriend's phone number written on a piece of paper. They then called her ex-girlfriend and broke the news. The woman said she was expecting Deborah to swing by to pick up some of her belongings, but she never did. Deborah had fallen on hard times and became addicted to drugs, which led to her losing custody of her 3 children a few years prior, but she was making an effort to better herself. She was a trained beautician and was working as a cocktail waitress at the time of her death. By this time, crack had taken over the streets of South Central and created thousands of addicts along the way, with a large portion being women, and all too often, they were preyed upon. Also, a large group of these women resorted to sex work in order to feed their addiction, which left them susceptible to robbery, assault, and murder. In September of 1985, LAPD officials held a press conference and told the public they believed Deborah and over a dozen other women were victims of a serial killer dubbed the Southside Slayer. The community was outraged, not only because law enforcement kept quiet about an active serial killer in the area, but they also felt that police weren't doing enough to catch the suspect due to the victims being drug addicts and sex workers. Local community groups began organizing and coordinating with law enforcement to catch the killer, but the bodies kept piling up. On August 12, 1986, the body of a 35-year-old woman named Henrietta Wright was found in the alley near the intersection of 3rd and Vernon Avenue. She had been shot twice in the chest with a .25 caliber pistol, and her body was wrapped in a blanket and covered with a mattress. A piece of a man's shirt had been stuffed in her mouth. Henrietta was the mother of 5 children. She had fallen on hard times and was homeless and living out of hotels. She worked in a cafeteria during the day and sometimes as a cocktail waitress at night. After a house fire destroyed her home, she became overwhelmed and turned to drugs to escape. Just like Deborah's murder, investigators found no bullet casings around Henrietta's body, but after running ballistics tests, they found that the bullets from both murders came from the same gun. The other Southside Slayer victims had been strangled. This led investigators to believe that there were now 2 killers operating in South Central. On January 10, 1987, the body of a 23-year-old woman named Barbara Ware was found in the alley near the intersection of Ascot Avenue and 56th Street. She had been shot once in the chest with a .25 caliber pistol, and her body was covered with trash and an empty gas tank. A witness who saw Barbara's body being dumped called 911.
Yes, I'd like to report a murder or a dead body or something.
Where at?
The address is 1346 East 56th Street in the alley. And the guy that dropped her off was driving a white and blue Dodge van. And, he threw her out. And the only thing that's hanging out of this, like he threw a gas tank on top of her, and the only thing you can see out is her feet.
Okay, what's your name?
Huh?
What's your name?
Oh, I don't stand anonymous. I know too many people. Okay, then, bye-bye.
All right.
Police later found the van in a church parking lot about 4.5 miles away from the crime scene. The hood was still warm to the touch, and people inside of the church said they had used the van earlier that evening. Several church members were interviewed, and the van was processed for evidence, but no evidence of the crime was found, and people at the church were cleared of any wrongdoing. The coroner estimated that Barbara had been killed 12 to 15 hours prior to her body being dumped. Some believe that the 911 caller was someone involved in the murder, or even the killer himself. The bullet recovered from Barbara matched the bullets recovered from Deborah and Henrietta. At this point, investigators were convinced that a new serial killer was operating in South Central. They then established a separate task force to investigate the murders, but just like before, they decided to keep it under wraps and not alert the public. On April 15, 1987, the body of a 26-year-old woman named Bernita Sparks was found in the alley near the intersection of 94th Street and Western Avenue. Bernita told her mother that she was going to the store to buy a pack of cigarettes, but she never returned home. Her body was found in a dumpster the next day. She had been strangled, beat, and shot once in the chest with with a .25 caliber pistol. On August 31st, 1987, the body of a 26-year-old woman named Mary Lowe was found in the alley near the intersection of 89th Street and Western Avenue. Mary told her mother that she was going to a Halloween party, but she never returned home. Her body was found behind a large bush the next day. She had been beaten and shot in the chest with a .25 caliber pistol. A witness reported seeing Mary get into an orange Ford Pinto with a young black man. On January 30th, 1988, the body of a 22-year-old woman named Lucretia Jefferson was found in the alley near the intersection of 102nd Street and Walton Place. She had been shot in the chest with a .25 caliber pistol and her body was covered with a mattress. A napkin with the word AIDS written on it had been placed over her face. On September 11th, 1988, the body of an 18-year-old woman named Alicia Alexander was found in the alley near the intersection of 43rd Place and Western Avenue. Alicia had made her way to a nearby liquor store located on Normandy Avenue, but she never returned home. She was found strangled and shot in the chest with a .25 caliber pistol. A sweatshirt was tied around her neck and her body was covered with a mattress. Detectives found no bullet casings at the crime scene, so they concluded the victims were killed somewhere else and dumped at the locations. They also found that the bullets entered the victims from the left side at a downward angle. Investigators collected DNA from the crime scenes, but at the time, DNA technology wasn't advanced and there was no CODIS database. CODIS stands for Combined DNA Index System, and it allows local, state, and federal forensics labs to exchange and compare DNA profiles. Unfortunately, CODIS was roughly a decade away from being widely implemented. Meanwhile, Lonnie continued his charade of being an upstanding community member. He could often be seen standing in his front lawn and sparking a conversation with anyone that happened to walk by. The neighborhood kids had even affectionately nicknamed him Mr. Lonnie. Also during this time, Lonnie took medical leave from work after hurting his right arm on the job. So in order to generate income, he began buying cars from auctions and junkyards. He would then fix them and sell them. Sometimes he forged vehicle titles and swapped license plates. Sylvia began working nights, and as soon as Crystal and Christopher went to sleep, Lonnie would hit the streets in search of his next victim. On November 20th, 1988, a 30-year-old mother of two named Anitria Washington was walking down the street on her way to a friend's house when Lonnie pulled up alongside of her in his orange Ford Pinto. He exited the car, approached Anitria, and asked if she wanted a ride. Initially, Anitria declined, but Lonnie was persistent, so she eventually gave in and accepted his offer. After she got into the car, Lonnie drove in the opposite direction of Anitria's friend's house. When she told him that he was going the wrong way, he replied that he had to swing by his uncle's house on 81st Street to pick up some money. Moments later, Lonnie's energy shifted. He became cold and dark. Lonnie said something, but Anitria couldn't hear what he said, so she turned towards him, and a few seconds later, everything went quiet. She then noticed blood on her clothes. She reached for the door, but Lonnie said, "Don't touch that door or I'll shoot you again." Anitria asked Lonnie why he shot her, and he replied that she was disrespecting him. Lonnie then began to ramble and call her by another woman's name. He refused to take her to the hospital, and as she drifted in and out of consciousness, Lonnie began to assault her. Anitria tried to push him off, but she passed out. She was awakened to the flash of a camera and realized Lonnie was taking photos of her. Anitria once again reached for the door handle, and this time, Lonnie opened the door and pushed her out, and the car drove away. Anitria was left for dead, but she was able to pick herself up and make it to her friend's house. She laid bleeding on the front porch until her friend found her and called an ambulance. Anitria would go on to survive and ultimately make a full recovery. Using DNA, investigators were able to tie Anitria's attacker to the other victims. Her statements also gave investigators a look into how the murders were committed. Seeing how all the victims were shot from the left at a downward angle, it made sense that the shooter was bigger and would be sitting in the driver's seat while the victim sat in the passenger seat. Also, her statements confirmed detectives' theory that the victims were shot in one place and dumped in another. Anitria gave investigators a description of the suspect in his vehicle. She also took them to where they stopped on 81st Street, which was only 3 doors down from Lonnie's home. Officers canvassed the area multiple times, but every time they did so, Lonnie left the neighborhood. Investigators never made the description of the suspect or his vehicle public. After the attack on Anitria, the murder suddenly came to a stop. By the early 1990s, neighbors noticed a change with the Franklins. They didn't seem to be the happy family that they once were. Sylvia wasn't at the home as often, and the parties and barbecues stopped completely. Lonnie had also become less conversational and helpful to his neighbors. Also, police began investigating Lonnie for his disability claim. They found evidence that he had filed multiple false claims over the years. With Lonnie's career and family in shambles, he continued to spiral. He was arrested for burglary, 2 assaults, and gun possession. At one point, he was found guilty of grand theft auto and spent 4 months in jail. While Lonnie was going through turmoil in his personal life, the community could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Although no suspect was apprehended, the murder seemed to stop, and for the next 13 years, there was no sign of the killer. By the early 2000s, crime in the city was at a low. The heights of gang violence and the crack epidemic had come to an end, so investigators began using their resources to crack cold cases. In November of 2001, a 6-man unit unit was established to investigate cold cases. DNA technology had advanced, giving the unit a chance at solving over 9,000 murders that occurred between 1960 and 1997. By this time, it was discovered that the Southside Slayer was actually at least 6 killers operating independently at the same time. By 2001, most of the group had been arrested and convicted, but a couple were still on the loose due to not having their DNA in the system. On December 21st, 2001, a 15-year-old young woman named Princess Bartholomew was reported missing. Princess had been abused by her father during her infant and toddler years, which led to the state taking her away from her biological family and putting her into foster care. At around 3 years old, she was placed with David and Dolores Smart in Claremont, California, roughly 30 miles east of Los Angeles. She arrived at the home with scars and bruises and would sometimes wake up screaming. From that point, the couple did all they could to help her. They enrolled her in private school and sent her to therapy, and over time, she began to recover. Princess was finally receiving the love and care that she had been denied of early in life. She had a family that adored her and gave her the best of everything, but in 1997, at the age of 10, she was hit with a tragedy. Dolores unexpectedly passed away, and later David began suffering from health problems. Princess's foster sister Samara began caring for her, but as a college student with her own children, the responsibility proved to be too much. Princess was then placed with a new family in South Central. She had a difficult time adjusting to her new environment. She ran away from home on multiple occasions, and later she turned to sex work. On March 19th, 2002, a passerby found Princess's body behind a shrub near the intersection of 83rd Street and Van Ness Avenue. She had been beaten and strangled. On July 11th, 2003, the body of a 35-year-old woman named Valerie McCorvey was found by a crossing guard near the intersection of 109th Street and Dinker Avenue. She had been strangled. DNA was recovered from Princess's and Valerie's crime scenes. The samples were tested and came back as a match. The samples also matched the .25 caliber murders throughout the 1980s. Although the method of murder changed, investigators knew the killer had come back. All the DNA matched one person, but there was still no suspect. Early on, DNA was only taken when suspects were arrested for violent crimes, and since Lonnie had never been arrested for such crimes, his DNA was never collected. On January 1st, 2007, a homeless man was looking for cans to recycle in the alley near the intersection of 94th Street and Western Avenue when he found the body of a 25-year-old woman named Janicia Peters. She had been shot in the lower back and stuffed inside of a garbage bag, which was later zip-tied closed. Evidence showed that she was still alive when she was put into the bag. Janicia was the mother of a young boy and had struggled with drug addiction. She was attempting to better herself and had recently enrolled in school and was taking computer science classes. Investigators found DNA on the zip tie, tying Janicia's murder to the other murders. With the murders continuing but not getting closer to an arrest, investigators hit a wall. They decided to circle back to the only woman on record for surviving an attack, Anitria Washington. In 2007, investigators called her in for an interview. Anitria was furious at the way the case was being handled. 20 years later, there were more victims and investigators still had no suspect. Anitria gave a near identical account of the incident, but this time, investigators took a special interest in the suspect taking her picture. During this time, a reporter named Christine Palisak learned that detectives were reinvestigating the .25 caliber murders. Christine discovered unsealed return search warrants and spoke to the cold case unit about the investigation. The unit was tight-lipped and didn't give her much information. Christine continued digging and made contact with someone in the coroner's office. The person gave Christine all types of information regarding the case. On August 27th, 2008, Christine's story about the .25 caliber murders was published in LA Weekly. Due to the killer taking a 13-year hiatus between the murders, he was dubbed the Grim Sleeper. Detectives were forced to confirm the report and admit that there was an active serial killer on the loose. They later held a press conference about the investigation. Some family of the victims didn't know anything about the investigation and only found out after seeing their loved one's picture come across the television screen. Detectives then released an age-progressed sketch of the suspect based on Anitria's description, and they also offered a $500,000 reward for information leading to the killer's arrest. Investigators received over 800 tips, but none of them panned out. Ironically, a billboard asking for information about the murders was put up 2 blocks from Lonnie's home. In April of 2008, California allowed law enforcement to use familial DNA in investigations, which meant DNA collected from unsolved crime scenes can now be compared to convicted offenders' DNA, and the samples don't have to be a perfect match, but just a partial match, which would indicate some kind of family tie and allow law enforcement to narrow their investigation. DNA from the Grim Sleeper was submitted for testing, but yielded no results. In July of 2010, investigators tested the DNA again, and this time they received a match to Lonnie's son, Christopher Franklin. Christopher was 28 years old at the time and had pled guilty to a gun charge, and as a part of his felony probation, he had to submit a DNA sample. Detectives began investigating Christopher's male family members and stopped when they got to Lonnie. He was in his mid-50s at the time, which put him in the correct age range. He also fit the suspect's physical description and lived on 81st Street. The victims were found in alleys all over South Central, so when investigators learned that Lonnie was a garbage man, it made sense that someone with immense knowledge of side streets and alleyways would be responsible for the murders. Detectives believed that Lonnie was their suspect, but they didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest. They wanted to make sure his DNA was 100% matched to the Grim Sleeper's DNA, so they began following him around, waiting for the chance to collect any evidence that may have his DNA, such as a cigarette butt, a piece of food, or a drink. For days, investigators came up empty, but soon afterwards, they caught a break. Detectives learned that Lonnie was attending a birthday party at a pizza parlor, so they followed him. One of the detectives told the restaurant's manager about the situation and asked if he could act as an employee. The manager agreed, and for the next 3 hours, the detective acted as a busboy. He walked the floor and collected things from the partygoer's table, and ultimately his efforts paid off. He was able to get a slice of pizza that Lonnie had taken a bite out of. The pizza was later swabbed for DNA, and the sample was sent out for testing. A couple of days later, the results were in. The DNA was a perfect match to the Grim Sleeper. On July 7th, 2010, law enforcement officials descended on Lonnie's home. He was taken into custody without incident. Officers then executed a search warrant of the home, and over 800 pieces of evidence were recovered, including multiple pairs of handcuffs, women's clothing, and 10 guns, including the .25 caliber pistol used in Genesia's murder. Investigators also found a stack of driver's licenses and ID cards. One was a Hawthorne High School student ID belonging to a 17-year-old young woman named Ayala Marshall. Ayala was the mother of a baby girl and had gotten involved with drugs while attending Hawthorne High. She had a history of running away from home. One day, she left her daughter with her parents and never returned. She was last seen leaving a medical center and has been missing since February 1st, 2005. Another ID card belonged to a 31-year-old woman named Rolenia Morris. She was last seen near the intersection of 91st Street and Western Avenue and has been missing since September 10th, 2005. While searching Lonnie's home, investigators found over 1,000 Polaroid pictures of women. A lot of the photos feature women that were unconscious, one of them being Anitria. The community was taken aback at the news. For over 20 years, Lonnie had been a pillar of the community, and he was the last person they would expect to commit acts so evil. Meanwhile, back at the police station, investigators began questioning Lonnie about the murders. Lonnie said he didn't know anything about them.
Ask you, do you know why you're here?
No, I don't.
Do you have any idea why you're here?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, we're working on an investigation, and there's a warrant for your arrest, charging a count of murder.
Count of murder.
Yes, sir. So before we get into it, and I know I can see right by your expression, you got a lot of questions to ask us. And we got a couple to ask you too. But look at all of these. Your luck is running out fast. And unless you come up with some kind of explanation. I mean, I'm not hiding anything from you. I'm telling you straight up. Straight
I
up.
understand that.
This young lady, her name is Henrietta Wright. Go ahead, take a close look.
No recollection at all.
No recollection, or you just don't?
I don't know her. I don't know her. But ugly, I don't know her. So,
What?
but ugly, I don't know her. Sorry, I don't know her.
This young lady, Deborah Jackson. So if I told you you were connected to the deaths of all of these ladies, who do you think Detective Kilcoyne and I would be sitting here looking at? Huh?
Mm-hmm.
You don't know who we'd be looking at?
Oh, okay. You looking at me? You looking at me?
I mean, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you on that. Yes.
I mean, all of these people that you say you don't know, through scientific evidence, are all pointing the finger at Lonnie David Franklin Jr. Sit there and look at their faces, all staring at you, pointing that finger at you. You wouldn't be here if we weren't absolutely convinced that you did this to these young ladies. Give me an explanation.
I have no explanation to give you for something I didn't do.
So So you're just saying you just got a run of bad luck
No, I'm not saying I had a run bad nothing. I don't know these people.
that you're connected to them? Look at them. They're all staring at you, pointing their fingers. Well, if they could point their fingers, they're looking right at you.
On July 7th, 2010, Lonnie Franklin was charged with 10 counts of murder, 1 count of kidnapping, and 1 count of attempted murder. On December 16th, 2010, investigators released 180 of the photos found at Lonnie's home to the public. Detectives didn't know if the women were alive, dead, or had moved away, so they hoped that family members or even the women themselves would contact them. The calls began pouring in, and investigators were able to identify most of the women in the photos and conclude that they were alive and well, but some of the women in the photos were never identified. Investigators believe Lonnie was responsible for at least 6 additional murders, with 2 occurring during his 13-year hiatus. One victim being a 21-year-old woman named Sharon Dismuke. On January 15, 1984, Sharon was found on the floor of a men's bathroom in an abandoned gas station. She had been shot twice in the chest with a .25 caliber pistol and had a rag stuffed in her mouth. Another victim was a 28-year-old woman named Inez Warren. On August 15, 1988, Inez was found in the alley, suffering from a gunshot wound to the chest. She was transported to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead. Another victim was a 36-year-old man named Thomas Steele. On August 14, 1986, Thomas was found dead near the intersection of 71st Street and Halldale Avenue. Another victim was a 43-year-old woman named Georgia Mae Thomas. On December 28, 2000, Georgia was found lying in the alley near 57th Street. She was shot twice in the chest with a .25 caliber pistol. The murder weapon was later recovered from Lonnie's home. Investigators decided not to pursue the additional murders and focus on the case they had already built. They figured Lonnie was already facing 10 murder charges and would be sentenced to either life in prison or death if found guilty, so they chose to put all their resources towards the trial. Lonnie's trial began on February 16, 2016. The courtroom was filled with reporters and families of the victims. No one showed up on Lonnie's behalf, not even Sylvia, Crystal, or Christopher. Lonnie didn't take the trial seriously and even brought an erotic novel to court to read during the proceedings. Prosecutors had a mountain of evidence against Lonnie, including a murder weapon, DNA, and a witness, Anitria Washington. On February 25th, 2016, Anitria took the stand and told the court about her encounter with Lonnie. She fingered Lonnie as the man that had assaulted her and attempted to kill her. The defense denied all the prosecution's claims. They even tried to pin 2 of the murders on another Southside slayer named Chester Turner. When it came to the DNA evidence, the defense said it could have came from another member of the family. On May 5th, 2016, the verdict was in. Lonnie Franklin Jr. was found guilty of all 10 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. A few weeks later, Lonnie was back in court for sentencing, and once again, the court was filled with families of the victims, but there was still no sign of Lonnie's family. During the proceedings, members of the victims' families took the stand and told the court how the loss of their loved ones affected their families. Lonnie's first reported victim, Ingrid, traveled from Germany to LA to give a statement to the court. She spoke about the kidnapping and assault and described how it affected her life. In June of 2016, Lonnie Franklin Jr. was sentenced to death, and he was sent to death row in San Quentin State Prison.
Why did all of this happen? Why did you do all of these things? All of these women were defenseless. They were not a threat to you in any way, shape, or form. And after thinking about it, and pondering it, going over it in my mind, I've come to this conclusion, that it doesn't matter why. I can't think of anyone that I've encountered in all my many years in the criminal justice system that has committed the kind of monstrous and the number of monstrous crimes that you have. All of these people have been suffering and will continue to suffer, but hopefully, as many of them said, they feel they're going to receive some peace, and I hope that you are able to leave here with some peace today. But it's not vengeance, it's justice, Mr. Franklin. And so, Lonnie Franklin Jr., for the first-degree murder of Deborah Jackson as alleged in count 1 and the special circumstance of multiple murder, it is the judgment and sentence of this court that you shall suffer the death penalty.
The families were relieved. They felt justice had finally been served, but their happiness was short-lived. On March 28, 2020, Lonnie was found dead in his cell. There were no signs of trauma on his body, and his official cause of death was never released to the public, but it's believed that he died of natural causes. He was 67 years old. Today, the Grim Sleeper's name lives in infamy, and he is considered one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Please like, comment, and subscribe.